Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're here with another discussion video. Today, we wanted to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is lightsaber duels, specifically Dooku and Sidious, and how they both stacked up to Yoda, how the battle on Geonosis between Yoda and Dooku was really eye-opening for Palpatine, to the point where Palpatine even held a substantial fear for Dooku following this. It's a really famous topic, and we wanted to get into exactly why Dooku's performance against Yoda caused Palpatine to be filled with such fear for Dooku and just how powerful he had become. But also we wanted to get into what is Dooku's approach when fighting Yoda blade to blade versus Palpatine's approach fighting Yoda blade to blade, and why Dooku experiences a lot more success than Palpatine famously does. Again, just keep in mind, this is lightsaber to lightsaber. It's not taking into account Palpatine putting away his lightsaber to combat Yoda, which is a topic that we'll get into a little bit deeper into the video. But I'm joined yet again with the Archivist.
Hey guys, what's going on? I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, so we'll get to talk about what makes Yoda so proficient as a duelist, what makes him so deadly, and how Sidious's opinion of Yoda and then later Dooku transforms. And in Star Wars, a lot of times you really get a good idea of where someone's power level is when other characters are reacting to how they perform in certain situations. And Dooku and Yoda is the best example of that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you real quick. What are Yoda's biggest strengths in a duel? What puts him above everybody else? What puts him, in the opinion of the people in the galaxy who are most familiar with him, maybe the best lightsaber duelist in the entire galaxy as of Revenge of the Sith, with the only real rivals maybe being Windu, Anakin, and Dooku and Sidious. So what makes Yoda the best, essentially?
Well, we kind of explored this a little bit when we were talking about the when Yoda was fighting General Grievous, why Grievous was completely unable to even get a mark on Yoda, much less even try to fight him on equal ground. Like, Yoda is the master of Ataru. And this is a form that's all about acrobatics, expending a lot of energy, but primarily using the Force to enhance your physicality. Now, we know with someone of Yoda's venerated age and his ability to command the Force, we forget, let's see, we talk a lot about how Yoda's really strong at physically applying the Force outside of himself, but we need to also remember that all the power we've seen him manifest externally, there's even more of that going on internally. And when you think about all the power that Yoda has boxed up in his little form, the amount of speed and acrobatic power that can come from that energy inside of him makes him probably one of the best users of the fourth form of lightsaber combat.
Yeah,
and
probably the best in all of the
Yeah,
lore.
Exactly.
Fairly.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. Yeah, I mean, because the thing about it is the way that Ataru works is it doesn't operate a lot like a lot of other lightsaber forms. I like to think about it something like this. It's like you think about how the footwork of lightsaber combat is sort of, you got your duelists on the floor, and they sort of operate on a 2D plane of movement. And that means their feet are kind of planted on the floor. They might use a few rolls and flips to kind of gain a height or leverage or something like that, or just to reposition. But Yoda's footwork is never just grounded to the floor. It's like his footwork is three-dimensional, because in like the Grievous comic, he is just climbing all over that cyborg, and just his vertical movement is the biggest factor here. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I mean, he displays that against Dooku and Palpatine as well, where he's able to bounce around the walls. And you wrote in the discussion notes here that he's able to essentially ride the Force like a wind, gaining momentum and leverage at will. He can jump up in the air and strike down against someone with an overhanded strike extremely powerfully without anything bouncing off of to like generate leverage and momentum. He can use the Force to do that because of his small stature, which brings so much weight to bear against every strike that Yoda is levying against somebody. And while he may not be able to generate the leverage that like an Anakin can, it's staggering for his form. It's staggering for his form, and he's able to change his direction so rapidly that 1 second he's attacking from above you to the next he's attacking to the side of you. He is almost as ferocious of a duelist in terms of like his offensive output as somebody like Maul or Palpatine. Like he is on that level, despite being as reserved as he is normally in a duel. He is as offensive minded as someone like Maul or Palpatine would be. And that makes him really impossible to pin down.
Yeah. Because I mean, it's like it's very unassuming. You go into it thinking like Grievous did, that it was going to be easy to kind of get him down and to use one's height as leverage against him. And then he's got that surprising burst of speed, momentum, and verticality, you know, kind of using the Force to just almost defy gravity to make his airtime last longer so that he can position himself in a way that most duelists just genuinely, physically can't.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I think is very interesting about Yoda is the people that underestimate him are always like Jedi are non-Force sensitives, but never Sith. Dooku and Sidious do not underestimate Yoda whatsoever. They know how good of a duelist he is. Anakin can say whatever he wants to about him being better than Yoda, but Dooku doesn't. Dooku probably thinks that he's better than Yoda, but I wouldn't say he underestimates him, and that's what makes him so impressive in the duel on Geonosis. But Palpatine absolutely does not underestimate Yoda whatsoever when others do. Let's go ahead and break down Dooku's approach against Yoda in Attack of the Clones and why this duel is so impactful and goes to illustrate Dooku's power and how he's grown to not only the Jedi, but to also Palpatine. You want to sort of talk why like that's so impressive?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly have always thought that the Geonosis duel was super underrated. Because I mean, it's the first time that we get to see Lord Tyrannus show off his skill as one who has mastered the blade as a Jedi and as a Sith, and he gets to actually prove his mettle against the Grand Master of the Jedi Order,
who at the time I would say is undisputedly the best duelist in the galaxy.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. That was kind of like a well-known, almost textbook fact in the Jedi Order at that point. Because I mean, Yoda has held that title for about 800 years by that point, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to Dooku, so one thing that is a known fact is lightsaber forms do sort of follow a rock, paper, scissors type of effect, where there are some that are hard or soft counters to the others. And it just so happens that Makashi happens to be Ataru's hard counter. And which means that because of the elegant and clean movements of the blade, and it's able to counter the more wild and erratic nature of Ataru users. They're able to keep them grounded and predict the acrobatics much easier. So that's already factor number one. But of course, with Dooku mastering the form to its absolute perfection and having been trained by Yoda while, you know, we assume practicing with him quite often, he knows the way that Yoda fights. He knows his ability to get inside of people's guard and even just jump all around them to confuse the opponent. Because Yoda moves with such speed and ferocity that it can confuse and bewilder even seasoned Force sensitives, as we've seen before. I mean, he even does it to Sidious, but of course, we'll talk to that in a minute. It's
Dooku's advantage to pin Yoda. And, you know, as you also put with the notes, his lightsaber, the curved hilt, gives him more leverage. Makashi is all about being precise and making precise cuts and precise parries, and the entire duel is Dooku parrying Yoda until Yoda actually stops and the two of them have a little blade lock where Dooku has managed to successfully stifle a full-blown offensive attack by Yoda.
It's amazing how, like, looking at that fight, I watched it and even slowed it down a little bit, just kind of watching how Dooku moves with Yoda. He doesn't move too much, which for some you might think that that's giving the advantage to the Ataru user, but by sort of keeping himself centered and not being intimidated by Yoda's flurry of attacks, he manages to maneuver his body to where he constantly keeps Yoda in front of him too. That kind of goes hand in hand with the leverage idea, is with his curve tilt, with his elegant strokes, there also comes the fact of making sure that the broad side of his blade is always facing the Jedi Master, and that he is constantly keeping Yoda, or Dooku is keeping Yoda at his strongest point of contact, where the most strength in his blade is. Where the most strength, excuse me.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, looking at the way Dooku fights Yaddle compared to the way Dooku fights Yoda. Yoda is obviously way more aggressive than Yaddle is, and when Dooku can control Yaddle's center line in that duel, the duel with Yoda is more so about controlling his own center line. You know what I'm saying? Being able to change advantage, to change direction against Yoda at a whim to hold the Grandmaster back. And whereas he knows he's better than Yaddle in Tales of the Jedi, she really stands no chance against him blade to blade whatsoever. He's able to control her direction. He's able to pin her down with his precision very effectively. Where in contrast to that, Dooku's focus when he's fighting Yoda is not being pinned down himself. That is his main goal, and you can clearly see that.
Yeah, it really is amazing when you watch them. I'm glad you brought that up, because Yaddle, as we could see by her stances and by how she moved her blade, she was a Sarisu practitioner, probably not one as adept as Obi-Wan, because, I mean, you know, she's
Definitely
a consular.
not.
She's not... No, she's not going to be focusing on blade work. She was mostly known for her Force abilities, at least in Legends continuity. But you know, you're exactly right when you say that Dooku, even as a Makashi user, which is considered to be more of a balanced form where you balanced offense and defense, I mean, he had Yaddle on the back pedal during that entire fight. He was very aggressive. And you could see that he knew he had the advantage there. But with the fight with Yoda, he knew he was measuring his skill against his master's, so he remained mostly on the defensive just to see how well he could contend with Yoda.
And I think that even going on in the Clone Wars, this is also illustrated when he's fighting Anakin and Obi-Wan. He's able to... He's effective against them because fighting Yoda is essentially like fighting 4 Jedi at once. You know, where he's able to change direction so rapidly. He's able to attack from so many different avenues that fighting Yoda is essentially training against a machine. And then when you enter like an actual sport of some kind, everything is moving slower. That's who Yoda has pitted himself against his entire life. That's who Dooku has pitted himself against, is Yoda his entire life. And because of that, everything else on the battlefield when it comes to a duel has opened up to Dooku, because he is almost as good as the best one ever. If not, at that point, you know, maybe equals. That's a debate.
Yeah, I mean, and you also got to also see how Dooku masterfully uses his environment to his advantage. Sidious does this probably to a greater degree, but if you'll notice, he kind of keeps his back to his starship for most of the duel, trying to keep Yoda in a specific cone of his vision until Yoda actually manages to slip this and bounce on top of the starship, and then Dooku immediately strikes his position on the starship to get him back down.
Gotcha. I do remember that. So you wrote in the notes, Dooku is not attempting to beat Yoda here. Can you sort of explain why that is?
Well, I mean, we got to remember the exact circumstances of what was going on during the Battle of Geonosis. Dooku, he was not challenged by Obi-Wan and Anakin. He was merely delayed by them, and not by much time at that. he was actually trying to escape because obviously his position was compromised. Too many Jedi. He had the Death Star plans. He was not trying to sit there and actually kill anybody. He was just trying to get out. But Anakin and Obi-Wan, they stifled his escape, and then Yoda comes in. And for just a moment, Dooku's mind is still on his escape, but I like to think that he recognized that as a golden opportunity to actually prove how powerful he is, both to the Jedi and to himself. So he holds off on his escape for just a moment, just so he could see how good he could do against his old master. They start out with the sorcerer's battle using their force powers, and then they get into a blade to blade. And it's a very quick duel, but part of the way through that, as Dooku's kind of on the defensive and he's fighting Yoda, his mind's still on retreat because the Death Star plans are obviously way more important than trying to triumph over his master in this moment. And not to mention, we all know that he knows that clone troopers and other Jedi are probably close behind Yoda. Which is true. Moments away. I mean, the duel, it's in its entirety only lasted about a minute, maybe less than that. And immediately after Dooku gets out, Padme and the clones come in.
It's incredible how a man with all of the disadvantages, all the advantages going against him, has such control over the situation to the point where he delays his escape to prove to Yoda exactly how strong he has become. But this not only proves to Yoda exactly how strong Dooku has become, it proves to Palpatine how strong Dooku has become. He utterly shocks his master by his ability to stifle Yoda. In fact, I would say it appears as if Sidious is far more impressed by this than Yoda was. He is absolutely shocked that Dooku is able to stalemate the Grand Master of the Order, and that is because Sidious does not underestimate how powerful Yoda is. He can underestimate how powerful Anakin, or overestimate how powerful Anakin is, and underestimate Kenobi, but he never underestimates Yoda. Never. And that's why when their duel opens, he tries to run.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Sidious does recognize Yoda as one thing and one thing only, his rival. He understands that Yoda is his light side counterpart, and even to some degree respects him for his power. And I put respect in a loose sense, but I say that because Palpatine, as a Sith, he sticks to his morals, and those morals are power. He respects power in whatever form that comes in. I mean, we're about to start talking heavily about why Palpatine enjoyed Grievous so much, that even though he didn't have power in the Force, he had physical power and was able to prove his superiority over the Jedi despite his disadvantages. And so it's like, when he sees Yoda, he's like, this is my counterpart, this is my ultimate rival. So, heck yeah, he's not going to underestimate him. When he sees Yoda come in, he's immediately thinking, what advantages do I have? And, I mean, the hallway is literally right there, right across from him. So when he tries to run, he's trying to force Yoda right into that hallway.
And the reason for that is because Ataru has less advantages in a more confined space. It has less avenues for attack, less options to generate momentum, and Sidious can essentially pin him down, which, as we saw with Dooku, that is how you beat Yoda, is you have to pin him down. There's no other way. You have to cut off his avenues of attack, and you have to cut off his abilities to generate leverage. But obviously, Yoda knows that, and he cuts him off. And we learn from the novelization, it's not Sidious's intention to avoid a confrontation with Yoda, but it is his intention to stack as many advantages in his favor against Yoda, in large part because he saw how well, Dooku had done against Yoda, and that fear that he had of the Grand Master, of the Master of Ataru. And I think that if you took away all the hubris and Sidious and you asked him, who is superior blade to blade, you or Yoda, I think after Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine would probably be honest, and I think he would say Yoda. Obviously, he would follow that up with comments like, the lightsaber is a Jedi weapon. I have grown beyond such means. I merely use it to insult the Jedi. You know, the lightsaber is as meaningless to me as you know, a speck of dust. He would back it up with some super arrogant, drawn-out explanation. But I think he would start his explanation with, yes, Yoda is better blade to blade than I am if I take all hubris away. And he doesn't have to say that. You know, he puts his lightsaber away against Yoda in that duel. He actively decides to put his lightsaber away. He's not disarmed.
Yes.
He's not disarmed. He puts it away. And that is because he knows he can't beat him.
He definitely tries, though.
He does try.
Sorry, what were you about to say?
I was just going to turn it over to you and ask you what key differences you see in the conflict between Dooku and Yoda versus Yoda and Sidious. And you're absolutely right. Sidious does try, and that's probably speaking to his hubris as well. And probably a little bit of frustration to, like, if Dooku can do this, I should be able to do this. But he's ultimately proven wrong. But what are the key differences there between the two Sith Lords and how they fight the Grand Master?
Well, I like to think of it this way. In the Dooku versus Yoda fight, even though, yes, Dooku is a Sith Lord at this point, but, I mean, look at the way he fights. This is a Jedi versus Jedi conflict. Dooku, as a Sith, fights like a Jedi. He keeps his cool. He uses his internal rage, obviously, to fuel his power, but he fights calmly, and Luke talks about that later on, about how when he says he believes that Jedi will always beat Sith at the lightsaber because Jedi can keep their cool and they're not going to get swept up in like a storm of rage and lose their technique. Dooku is all technique, and he's all about keeping his cool while still using the dark side. It's really a beautiful sight to behold when you break it down in those metrics. But the thing about it is when Yoda is fighting Sidious, that is a Jedi versus Sith duel. And you see Sidious getting upset. He's actually using his anger. And one of the reasons that he gets upset is because he can't pin Yoda down. And the reason he's trying to do that is Dooku remained mostly on the defensive, as we said before, because that's something a Jedi would do. But Sidious actually, even though he's a master of the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, he primarily uses the 7th form Juyo, which is an aggressive form in and of itself. And he chooses to actually meet Yoda's aggression with his own and goes on the offensive himself to force Yoda on the defensive. Atari was very weak when it comes to defense. The form is almost all attack. It's very much like Jimso in that way. But it's interesting to watch that when he fails to put Yoda into the hallway, Sidious then chooses a different area where it's smaller, which is the Chancellor's podium. And he flips a switch, causes them to raise up, giving Yoda less area to move around. And despite that, the new Emperor still cannot pin Yoda down no matter how aggressive he gets. And if you notice, after his first snarl, like after the first close-up saber lock, Yoda actually puts him on the defensive and goes on an attack vector, and Sidious really doesn't like that.
He overpowers him
after that. Yeah,
you can see him you can see Yoda overpower Sidious.
I love it.
I think in that moment, all of Sidious's fears are realized. And I would also like to think that if Dooku was still around in some respect, say he's still at full power, I think Sidious would have thoughts about getting rid of Dooku as quickly as possible, because all of his fears would be confirmed. Another interesting thing about Dooku, real quick, because everyone will say, "Well, Anakin beat Dooku. Can Anakin beat Yoda here?" And it's not. Star Wars doesn't operate on ABC logic, not at all.
No, it doesn't.
It operates. You have to take them specifically in characters, how they fight and how that compares to one another. You have to take into account their environment. Their mindset is massively important. I don't think anyone would ever say that they think Obi-Wan's more powerful than Anakin, and yet that's the most famous duel maybe in the entire franchise. definitely in the entire franchise. But Dooku in Revenge of the Sith, he's older, he's fatigued, he's tired against Anakin. And I think that the Dooku in Attack of the Clones, if he were to fight Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, I think it would be a lot closer. I'm not saying Anakin doesn't win still, but I'm saying it's a lot closer. Dooku in Attack of the Clones is probably at his prime.
Yeah, I guess you would say his prime in terms of blade skill balanced out with force ability and his physical ability. Because in, I think it said in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Dooku was, what, 87 in Revenge of the Sith?
Something close to that, yeah.
And it said that he was feeling every one of those years when fighting Anakin. And I love, there was a moment where Matthew Stover, he writes it beautifully. He's like, with every blow that Anakin rains upon Dooku, it ages him by another year and then another decade. And he's just like depleting in his power and his physical strength the longer that the duel goes on because of how strong Anakin is now.
Yeah. Going back to the whole Sidious and Dooku thing, though, let's wrap it up. What are our sort of closing thoughts on Dooku and how he approaches the duel with Yoda, and Sidious and how he approaches it? What I think it is a realization of Dooku's power, and it's confirmation to Dooku himself that he is in fact almost as powerful and as skilled as Yoda at the blade, and that instantly makes him a major threat to Sidious, because for Sidious, he never believed this. He always thought that Dooku would be a very strong asset, but the confirmation that Dooku is now, on the threat level of somebody like Sidious instantly, or on somebody like Yoda, instantly puts Dooku on the top of like most dangerous people to Palpatine. And that's why later when Ventress starts growing in power and Ventress starts, becoming more and more adept with the lightsaber and with the Force, the two of them are a legitimate threat to Palpatine's rule. And I don't think that if that ever I don't think if Dooku ever fought Yoda on Geonosis, Palpatine would have had that fear and that respect. And the respect and the fear that he has for Yoda is translated directly to Dooku because now he sees what Dooku can do.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's my pretty much closing argument, or not even an argument, closing statement. Palpatine's fears are proven correct. He's forced to put his lightsaber away against Yoda. He's more powerful than Yoda in the Force, but Yoda's ability to fight offensively and to fight intelligently are all confirmed in that moment. And along with that, all of Palpatine's prior fear for Dooku also confirmed in that moment.
I like the just the separation of the strengths between Yoda and Darth Sidious, because when it comes to Yoda and Dooku, this, like I said earlier, this is very much a personal conflict, where it is definitely the apprentice trying to prove his superiority over the master, and he does that in the way that he and Yoda have always connected before, which is the lightsaber. And of course, Dooku just fights his heart out because he wants to prove how powerful he is. With Sidious, this is actually about winning, and this is about putting down the Jedi once and for all. It's very idealistic. And so when he can't best Yoda at the lightsaber, he acknowledges, okay, well, it doesn't really matter anyway. This is not what this conflict is even about. Because, I mean, as you know, Sidious had already won at that point. Like, he had the Empire, the galaxy was his. This fight with Yoda was more like just a personal itch to scratch. But this wasn't the Old Republic anymore. They didn't have to settle things with the lightsaber. So Sidious falls back on his Force abilities, where he can actually prove he's the superior, and he keeps Yoda at a distance by throwing the Senate pods, and he's much happier doing this, as we can see. And as soon as Yoda even gets close, first thing that Sidious does is he uses a blast of Force lightning, probably stronger than we saw him do on Mace Windu. Like, if you look at the footage, Palpatine kind of keels back from his own Force lightning and blows Yoda's lightsaber right out of his hand, first thing. And then they kind of go into their Force clash. Yeah. And he just, like, gets rid of that immediately.
I look at it as just Palpatine being a narcissist. He's like, I know I haven't, obsessed with the lightsaber as much as someone like Dooku has, but I'm still going to try it against Yoda because I'm the best, and I'm going to still try and see where I stack up. And then when he realizes, like you said, Palpatine's already won in that moment. And then when he realizes, oh, maybe I was wrong, he puts his lightsaber away once he creates distance, and he, fights Yoda with the blade. And we're not trying to say that Dooku or Yoda is more powerful than Palpatine. I know that most viewers know that, but there's some that might be getting it a little bit misconstrued. Palpatine just doesn't, that's not where his focus is. But the point is, he's still going to try it because he's a narcissist.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say, too. A lot of this is a testament to Dooku. A lot of it is a testament to Yoda. The biggest thing to take away from this is that of all the people that sort of underestimated Yoda, Palpatine never did. And because Palpatine was aware of Yoda's power, which if you read in the comics and you read in the books, Palpatine never criticizes Yoda for not being strong enough. He criticizes him for using powers, not using his power to bring what he wants upon the galaxy and enforce his will. And that's why
it's about
Yoda...
blindness and... Yeah, sorry, my bad.
No, you're good. That's why Yoda's the perfect foil to Palpatine, right? I mean, he's just...
Yeah, I mean,
he's nearly as powerful.
It's about Yoda's blindness and his arrogance, which is representative of the entire Jedi Order's blindness and arrogance. That's what irks Palpatine so much, not his power per se.
Yeah, their arrogance. When I say power, I mean like what he has latent within him, but his inability to use that in a way that Palpatine believes he should be. The Force set him aside as the powerful. He should use that power. And Palpatine, and Palpatine is frustrated by that aspect of Yoda specifically. But that's about it, guys. Yoda, Dooku, Palpatine, the three of them, the masters of the Clone Wars era, you could say. Some of the most interesting dynamics in all of the lore, especially Dooku and Palpatine's relationship and the past relationship that he had with his master and Yoda, and his need to prove his superiority, and how that all, reaches Palpatine behind the scenes and learns of the true might of the players in the game, especially when concerning Dooku. This is the moment where Dooku proves himself, and he proves himself not only to Yoda, but he proves himself also to Palpatine. And as a small little thing, I would also add, I don't really think that Yoda's intention when he fought Dooku was to prove that he was still better than his apprentice. And because of that, I don't think that Yoda's really shocked by the stalemate. I think Yoda probably anticipated that it could go that way, Yeah,
I guess that's why he gave him the "fought well you have" line.
Yeah, I never get the impression that Dooku fighting on the high level that he does is like earth-shattering to Yoda. I think that just as Palpatine never underestimated Yoda, Yoda probably never underestimated Dooku, which is another interesting facet.
But you can see Yoda putting his back into the fight with Palpatine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, but that's also the intention behind the duel. When he fights Palpatine, he's there to kill Palpatine. He's not necessarily trying to kill Dooku. If anything, he probably still hopes Dooku can embrace the light side. But, destroy the Sith we must. Yoda has one goal. That's to kill the Sith. And, it sort of goes to the character's headspace in these duels. The first duel for Yoda and Dooku, it's just a test of where the other one is in terms of their power. That's how it's going for both sides. For Yoda, it's obviously to save Obi-Wan and Anakin. But when it comes to Sidious versus Yoda, they're aiming to kill both of them.
All right, man.
Well, thank you so much, guys. If you've stayed for as long as you have, please let us know what you think about this. What are your thoughts on Yoda versus Dooku, and then Yoda versus Sidious, and all the characters' opinions on one another? Other topics you want to see discussed in great detail, please leave them down below. We'll be doing this series hopefully weekly. And may the Force be with you, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me on again. See y'all next time.